Nowhere in the pages of history can one find a greater champion of justice. Return with us now to those thrilling days of yesteryear.
And I'll tell you something else, too, is I cannot stand sissies.
You're going to talk about wrestling, that's redneck talk.
And guess what, fatso? I'm the world champion.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the DragonKingKarl Classic Wrestling Audio Show. This is 1,000 Hours. This is a sub-series of the DragonKingKarl Show where we talk about the pioneer era of pro wrestling. Thank you very much for joining me. I am Carl Stern from WhenItWasCool.com. You can also hear this show at WrestlingObserver.com, Figure4Online.com. All of our free feeds, Spotify, Amazon, Apple Podcasts, wherever you would find a major podcast, you should find us there as well. So thank you very much for joining me. We're going through the timeline right now. You don't have to listen to all these shows in order. This is hour 82. You don't have to listen to the other 81 shows. You can list these shows individually as we all talk about different time periods in the pioneer era. Presently, we're going through the pages of my latest book, which is DragonKingKarl's Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus, the Bible of the Pioneer Era of Wrestling. And my Kindle app tells me we're 62% of the way through the book, so we're moving along quite well. You can order the book from Amazon straight from there, or from WhenItWasCool.com, one of the many links on the front page. So thank you very much if you bought the book, enjoying it, reading along with us. This episode, Hour 82, is sponsored by Marcus G. And these shows are sponsored. This show is kind of extra to what all we do at When It Was Cool. And so in order to do it, we have to have a sponsor for each episode. And the way you do that simply, if you want to make a donation through PayPal or Cash App, you can do that on the front page of When It Was Cool. I just leave it up to you how much you want to give, a $10 minimum, but we've had people give upwards of $100. Whatever you feel like you would like to sponsor a show for, we would be very grateful. Hey, if you've got a website or a podcast of your own or some project you want us to plug, I'll be glad to do that in your hour as well. So this is sponsored by Marcus G, who I believe became a Patreon supporter When It Was Cool. And that's another way you can sponsor an hour. Any new Patreon signups, we dedicate an hour of this show to them. So thank you, Marcus G. So let's go straight into the book now, get into some deep dive pioneer era wrestling history. And I've been sort of paying attention a little bit more in detail since I've written the book. Right now, there seems to be another resurgence in interest in the pioneer era. Last month, surprisingly enough, I had one of the better months I've had so far in book sales. When I would expect, after the book having been out for a few months, a steady decline. However, last month seemed good. I'm seeing a lot more information online. I think there's some other books that's come out. I know Scott Beekman came out with a William Muldoon book. I have not read that book yet, but I do know Scott Beekman does great work. His previous book, Ringside, is a tremendous book to read about the cultural influence of pro wrestling, especially here in America. And the Wrestling Historian Salon on Facebook, other places, seems to have been a resurgence kind of in interest in the pioneer era, and certainly there to stoke that fire if at all possible. And we're going to begin stoking it back in 1883. We're picking up in February of 1883. And we're going to go to Madison Square Garden in New York City. We've already previously talked about this on one of the regular Carl Stern shows, DragonKingKarl shows, where I was doing the Madison Square Garden history, which is something I want to work on getting back to. Haven't done one of those segments in a while, but it's certainly not forgotten, and I may start tacking those on to the regular shows. But here we are in Madison Square Garden in 1883. 2,000 people are there. It's not the giant, enormous arena it is today. It was smaller, but it held more than 2,000 people for sure. So this wasn't just a jam-packed attendance, so pretty good. On the undercard of the Jim Mace versus Herbert Slade, and remember last episode on 1,000 Hours, we were talking about the giant Maori Slade. who was neither a giant nor really a wrestler. He was a boxer. He was brought into the United States to be a special boxing exhibition. And so he's going to box one of the most well-known prize fighters of the day, Jim Mace. But on the undercard of that show, we have wrestling. And we have Edwin Bibby wrestling Barry N. Herbert to a draw. And I don't know Barry Herbert, but Edwin Bibby, of course, one of the top stars of the era. February the 10th, 1883, Cincinnati, Ohio, at the Coliseum Theater. William Muldoon wrestled Edwin Bibby to a draw after an hour wrestling. So that's how impressive he is. He wrestled William Muldoon, of all people, to a draw. Muldoon announced to the crowd that he had injured his chest while wrestling in St. Louis, and neither one could throw the other one. He offered a rematch once he was healed. Professor Theobald Bauer was the referee. Bauer is starting to reassert himself after kind of being out for a little while. And it's interesting that the Kansas City Times newspaper runs a piece from that originally ran in the Peoria, Illinois Journal. And it stated that Kansas City is basically being swindled by wrestling. They point out that Clarence Whistler is now wrestling again after supposedly breaking his shoulder in a match against Professor Theobald Bauer, and how that whole match was a swindle as the heavy betting was on Whistler. They tell about how their city had been swindled by Lucian, Mark, and others. And we've talked about Clarence Whistler's conveniently injured collarbone and shoulder. He regularly seemed to suffer this injury. It seemed like a lot of times it was a work. Seems like sometimes maybe it was legitimate. And let's don't forget, Clarence Whistler also did a lot of strongman stunts. And these weren't like, the old... You picture the old circuses, the bald guy with the, curly mustache lifting probably gimmicked weights above his head. It wasn't that sort of thing. He was doing these weird, like, world's strongest man stunts where he was picking up people in chairs and carrying multiple people across the stage and doing these weird, heavy lifting kind of things that would often lead to injury, especially, we're talking about back in the 1800s, sports medicine. Was it even 100 years later, in 1983? Think about how far we've come in sports medicine since 1983. We'll go back 100 years prior to that, and you can see how injury is certainly something that these wrestlers, entertainers, strongmen, and such would want to avoid. With Clarence Whistler, it's very hard to tell what was a work, what was legitimate. Same with William Muldoon, quite honestly. And Muldoon starts getting a few injuries along as well. William Muldoon's career, his wrestling career is not that long. Really, about 10 years of actual, full-time wrestling before I think he gets bored with wrestling at a point. He really gets enamored with boxing, prize fighting, and physical culturists. Stuff like his spa he opens, which becomes really the prototype for health and fitness clubs, for here in the United States. I mean, he is certainly a pioneer and an innovator in that area as well. But boy, in those years that Muldoon was active, he was immensely popular guy. I mean, the newspapers covered him everywhere he went, and it's no wonder he had such an impact on wrestling. This whole exhibition tour he's been going through was really one of the first truly well-organized cross-country wrestling promotions. I mean, he wasn't a regional territory guy, was William Muldoon. We often associate him with New York because that's where he got his start. He was a police officer there. But William Muldoon wrestled a lot in the Northeast in New York, but he also wrestled a lot in the Middle America, St. Louis, Chicago, Kansas City, and he wrestled a ton on the West Coast, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Portland, Oregon. I mean, he was a true national star in the days where you couldn't fly coast to coast. You were on a train. I mean, this is the days of the Oregon Trail, for Pete's sake. And Muldoon's all over the country. So it's interesting, to say the least, just how it would have been a sight to behold back in the day, knowing what we know now, to see just how they pulled some of this stuff off. February the 15th, 1883, in Cincinnati, Ohio, Meldon Hall, William Muldoon defeated Edwin Bibby in Greco-Roman, 2 out of 3 falls. February 16th, 1883, Lawrence, Massachusetts, at the Opera House, William P. Jordan defeated Andre Cristal in Lancashire wrestling when Cristal used a Greco-Roman hold in violation of the rules, and it was declared a foul. Almost certainly, these matches, anything that's going to involve Andre, Cristal, Lucian, Mark, any of the Greco-Roman folks, you've got to really just accept that it's almost certainly a work. There are certainly instances where that was not the case. This could very well have been one of them. I know little to nothing about William P. Jordan, his opponent here. Not a name that came up a lot. So that's one of the fun things to me about researching the Pioneer era. Without film, without first-hand witness accounts, except those that are in the newspaper. And look, the newspapers are very, very biased, but they're biased toward it being a hippodrome, it being a work, it being a put-up job, as they called it at the time also. And so sometimes there may have been legitimate matches that came through that the newspapers scoffed at. It's very hard to tell without first-hand accounts, but based on most of the inference, most of the circumstantial evidence we have, I would say by this point in time, Greco-Roman wrestling, 90% of the matches being held in America are worked, are hippodromes, are predetermined put-up jobs. Collar and elbow, less so, but probably still substantial. Probably, 60 to 70% are works, hippodromes, put-up jobs. Catch as catch can, there's not really enough evidence of it yet, probably much less significantly worked than the others, but yet we don't have enough example. Remember, that's just really getting going right now here in the United States. February 17th, 1883, the last pro wrestling matches are held at the original Madison Square Garden, which was, formerly known as Gilmore's Garden in New York City, New York. They took place on the undercard of another Jim Mace sparring exhibition with Slade the Mayora. On this show, Vero Small, Black Sam, defeated Joe Ryan. Young Bibby defeated Harry N. Herbert. Young Bibby wrestled Harry N. Herbert to a draw. Attendance 1,500 people. And here's an interesting name, Young Bibby. Okay, so this is not Edwin Bibby. This is another thing that carried over from the Pioneer era to the modern era. I started watching wrestling late 70s, early 80s. And, of course, you had, by that point in time, you had a lot of number twos and juniors, especially in Lucha Libre. You had, Mr. Wrestling 2, the Spoiler 2, the Grappler 2. You had, Elio Del Santo, or El Santo Jr., the son of El Santo, is going to be debuting, and he debuted in the early 1980s. So the second coming of, and these people weren't always related. In fact, most of the time in the 1800s they weren't related at all. They weren't sons or taking on. They were what whoever was promoting the show felt like this guy, and I don't know the real name of Young Bibby, but he was, represented as the next Edwin Bibby. And there would be multiple. There was a very famous young Gotch and a young Hackenschmidt after the days of Frank Gotch and George Hackenschmidt. So this was a thing that would come along. We'll start. I don't know. I don't think he was the first. I don't think Young Bibby was the first, but he's one of the earlier ones, and I think we'll start noticing that happening more and more often. Also on February 17th, 1883, in Jacksonville, Florida, at the fairgrounds, Duncan C. Ross, first time we've mentioned him on today's show, Duncan C. Ross defeated Professor Theobald Bauer for the National Police Gazette Greco-Roman World Championship medal when Bauer suffered an arm injury during the second fall. And this is kind of interesting. I don't know really what this championship's all about here. William Muldoon is the world Greco-Roman champion. He would never lose that championship from the moment he started claiming it all the way through. He would never lose that. He was backed, was William Muldoon, by the National Police Gazette and Richard K. Fox, the editor. So what this is, I do not know, other than a hippodrome. It is probably some championship that they made up here down in Jacksonville, Florida, which was, look, there was, we've seen Jacksonville, Florida have wrestling before. John McMahon wrestled down there. So even back in the Pioneer era, Jacksonville, Florida was one of the places, more so than Atlanta, for sure. Seems like there were stops being made in Jacksonville, Florida. So it's kind of interesting. If anybody ever decides to research up the history of Pioneer Wrestling in Jacksonville, Florida, maybe that's something we'll do later on in this 1,000-hour series. But I think you could uncover some interesting stuff there. So wrestling in the Deep South is certainly, in the territorial era. Southern wrestling was, besides New York City, it was often the hottest place, spread out geographically, over several states. But wrestling has always been very culturally influential in the Deep South. And that's, I think, owed to the fact it dates all the way back to the Pioneer era. February 26, 1883, Savannah, Georgia. Speaking of, Duncan C. Ross and Professor Theobald Bauer, they just go up the eastern seaboard a little further up to Savannah, Georgia. Duncan C. Ross beats Bauer to win back this National Police Gazette Greco-Roman Championship medal. Beat him again over that same medal, so who knows what that is. Now here's another term to introduce into our Wrestle Speak. We've talked about this before. For those of you who are fans of wrestling from the territorial eras onward, of Carney speak, became kind of involved in pro wrestling. The terms like work and shoot and, kayfabe and all those heel, babyface, all those terminologies were out there, but this started in the 1800s, and they developed over time. We've already talked about hippodrome. Now, hippodrome was actually in reality, most people, if you asked them back in the 1800s what's a hippodrome, they would have sent you to their local entertainment arena, mixed entertainment venue. But what it meant in the world of professional wrestling, what it meant in terms of newspaper reporting, was a fake wrestling match, a predetermined wrestling match. And we saw put-up job used for a work, and from put-up job came the term eventually jobber. The person who lost a put-up job would have been a jobber, and that term stuck, whereas put-up job fell into obscurity and was replaced by work or shoot. Work for a predetermined match, shoot for a real match. So here's another one. March the 4th, 1883, Clarence Whistler gives an interview to a newspaper, which was reported in the Rochester, New York Democrat and Chronicle, saying, and here we just talked about percentages. Let's see what somebody actually a wrestler, told a newspaper. Look, Clarence Whistler, we've heard of the Jack Pfeffers and others, they quote, expose pro wrestling. Well, here in 1883, Clarence Whistler did not care one bit about exposing pro wrestling. He never did in his whole lifetime. And here's what he said. 99 out of 100 wrestling matches are Barneys or prearranged. So he says it's actually 99% are works. Now, I have a DragonKingKarl note here for the book. It says, we've now seen Barney used a couple of times in WrestleSpeak. A Barney in the 1880s was usually a personal insult, meaning a person was no good or lazy. Somehow that meaning got changed in the newspapers to mean a fake or prearranged wrestling match. And so a lot of times you would see both hippodrome, put-up job, and Barney also used to describe a worked match. Let's see here. Let's go to March the 14th, 1883. Go to Topeka, Kansas, the Opera House. Clarence Whistler defeated the Unknown, who was actually Tom Cannon, in Greco-Roman wrestling in Two Straight Falls. March the 18th, 1883, New Orleans, Louisiana. St. Charles Theater. Wrestling very popular in New Orleans in the Pioneer era as well. all the way back. In fact, New Orleans may have been one of the earliest places in the United States. Remember King of the Wrestlers Charles from earlier in the book. New Orleans, and Matsuda Sorikichi, he came in through New Orleans as well. First place we hear of him. So here we're in New Orleans. Attendance 1,500 people. Professor Theobald Bauer defeated Duncan C. Ross in a Greco-Roman wrestling match. 2 out of 3 falls. Bauer tells the newspaper that he is staying in New Orleans for a while and will seek out other matches. Duncan C. Ross announces he is continuing on to California, where he will compete in the Scottish Games and then probably retire from wrestling. So let's follow the exploits of champion wrestler Duncan C. Ross, see how he ends up. Now then, we're about to talk about somebody who's making some early appearances here, who will be a big, big name, is one Evan Lewis, the original Strangler Lewis. Now, he's not Strangler Lewis yet. He's going to get that name given to him by the public in the newspapers, and we'll see there's a whole big scandal around how he became Strangler Lewis. So right now he's just Evan Lewis, and he's in Wisconsin, Mineral Point, on March 20th, 1883. At the Opera House, Evan Lewis, billed as the Montana champion at that time, defeats Ben Knight, who is billed as the Wisconsin champion. Yeah, those probably just honorary or fake championships there. March the 23rd, 1883, Batavia, New York, at the Opera House, attendance 600 people. G.W. Flagg defeats Jesse Robinson. The newspaper said that G.W. Flagg was the champion of America in mixed styles. And that was a claim many wrestlers were making by this point. And G.W. Flagg, to me, is kind of, out of all the Pioneer-era wrestlers, he's the guy that kind of got the shortest end of the stick. He won much more, especially against H.M. Duffer, than he's ever given credit for. He beat H.M. Duffer numerous times when Duffer was the American collar and elbow champion, yet he never got the championship, never got it in his whole career, despite beating the champion multiple times. And he's not a guy you usually hear a lot about in terms of the Pioneer era. I mean, he's far behind the discussion to William Muldoon and John McMahon and Colonel James H. McLaughlin and all those, yet he was a very prominent wrestler. I think G.W. Flagg, up to this point anyway, is kind of the pioneer who doesn't get talked about enough. And so we'll make sure to point him out every time we run across him in the book here, because I think he's well worth studying. March 27th, 1883, Topeka, Kansas, Globe Theater, Tom Cannon defeated Clarence Whistler in a catch-as-catch-can match. So here's catch-as-catch wrestling. The two would meet the next night in a Greco-Roman match, which they did with Clarence Whistler beating Tom Cannon. So basically they're swapping their better styles. You know, same thing Muldoon and Whistler were doing when they were working together. On March 28, 1883, Batavia, New York, Opera House, G.W. Flagg defeated John Rabshaw in mixed-style match, and Rabshaw was a well-known wrestler as well. And finally, here for the first half of the show, and then we'll take our mid-show break, March 31st, 1883, got a few notes from that day. Galveston, Texas, the Opera House, Theodore Greek George defeated Fred Muller in Greco-Roman wrestling, and Greek George, we've talked about him. He'll eventually manage Evan Lewis. He himself, Greek George, was a very famous, well-known wrestler back in his day. Fred Muller is a guy he worked quite a bit with. I think Muller passes away to an illness. I believe it's in the book. We'll come across it at some point. But he tours with this Fred Muller a little bit, does Greek George. Also, on the end of March 1883, Batavia, New York, Opera House, G.W. Flagg. Now he's in a 3-match winning streak. He beats Jesse H. Robinson, collar and elbow wrestling. And then also in Madison, Wisconsin, and this would be the place that Evan Strangler Lewis, the future Strangler Lewis, would be most associated with, Madison, Wisconsin. Attendance was said by the newspapers to be large. Evan Lewis defeated Stuart McCormick in a mixed styles match. The Iowa County Democrat paper said, quote, "It seems as though Lewis is unable to find his equal in this part of the country." And certainly he would go on to become quite a major name in the Pioneer era of wrestling. So let's take our mid-show break right now. When we come back, we got some pretty cool stuff coming up, including the death of a Pioneer-era wrestler. All that and much more right after this.
We depend on Patreon support for our website and podcast network. In order to continue these podcasts you enjoy, we need you to visit whenitwascool.com and pledge at least $1. You'll gain access to lots of exclusive podcasts, newsletters, and more. Sign up is quick, simple, and can be canceled at any time. Whenitwascool.com and click any Patreon link. Thank you.
All right, we're back to the second half of the show, and again, we want to thank new Patreon supporter Marcus G for sponsoring this Hour 82 of our 1,000-hour series. Presently, we're sponsored all the way up to hour number 103, and so you can keep this show going by becoming a sponsor of this episode. You can make a direct donation on the front page of When It Was Cool, PayPal or Cash App. Minimum of $10. You can give as much as you like. We certainly use it toward running in fact, we use that principally to run our website and podcasting service. So as long as this keeps going, the show will keep going. So thank you all for that. And thank you again, Marcus G. So we continue on. We're now in April of 1883. Going to Rochester, New York, Grand Opera House. The Unknown defeated G.W. Flagg. So here, who's this Unknown? He beats G.W. Flagg to become the world mixed style and collar and elbow champion. These are largely fictitious belts or titles that these are not really what you would say were linear championships like the American collar and elbow title or the American Greco-Roman or any of those. This is just, hey, here's the great G.W. Flagg. He's this champion. And the newspaper reports the Unknown was actually H.M. Doofer. Yes, the king of the collar and elbow style matches, and he's now, the newspaper says, 40 years old. So this is kind of late into the career of H.M. Doofer. Remember, and H.M. Doofer started young. He started as a teenager. His father was a wrestler. He's a second-generation wrestler. Already here in 1883 was H.M. Doofer. Several newspapers in the following week called the match a sham match. So here's another term for a work, put-up job, Barney, hippodrome, sham. Also on this same day, April 5th, 1883, we've talked about this guy several times. He was never a big star, but he was certainly a well-enough known star in the New York area and up the East Coast. Matt Grace. He got in a little trouble with the law as well, so he had some issues going on. But wrestler Matt Grace, who'd long been part of Harry Hill's New York-based wrestling troupe, dies at the age of 41 following a short illness. All right, April the 7th, 1883, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, attendance 2,000 or more people. Joe Acton defeats Tom Connors in 2 straight falls of Catch-as-Catch-Can for the Catch-as-Catch-Can Championship of America. And so Joe Acton previously had been claiming this. Now, this one is real. I mean, this is kind of a transferable linear championship by most historians, I think, agree on that. Most title histories would list this. So, Joe Acton, now he's one of our American champions. All right, April 17th, 1883, Kansas City, Missouri, at the Sanderson Opera House. Attendance is a very large crowd. Clarence Whistler defeated Tom Cannon. 2 straight falls of a mixed-style match. Now, there's 2 similar names here, and it's easy to get them confused. We just talked about Joe Acton in Philadelphia beating a guy named Tom Connors. And now in Kansas City, we have Clarence Whistler beating Tom Cannon. So Tom Cannon and Tom Connors are 2 different people. And there's going to be an interesting story about them coming up in the book. We'll get to that when we get to it here. One of these guys is going to be potentially poisoned in a wrestling tournament. Yeah, that's a story worth checking out in the book there. On April 20th, 1883, in New Orleans, Louisiana, the newspapers report that William Muldoon is staying in the city for a little while. Yeah, he's down in New Orleans now. He's been playing the role of a wrestler in the play As You Like It for the Majeska Entertainment Group. But that play is taking a break for a few weeks. Muldoon reports he would like to do some wrestling while in New Orleans and issues an open challenge in the newspapers. And so he's going to wrestle down here a while. Now, this play, this entertainment group, is going to be what ultimately takes him to the West Coast. And he's going to sit up out there in Los Angeles, San Francisco, even as far as Portland, Oregon. And he's going to be a big star out there as well once he gets to the West Coast. Remember, there's no hopping on a 747 back in 1883. It's going to take a minute to get there. April 23rd, 1883, Toledo, Ohio, at the Opera House. Here's one of my favorites, Lucian Mark, wrestling in the name Lucian Mark Cristal. He defeated the Michigan Giant, Dick Burke, in Greco-Roman wrestling. Lucian Mark had told the newspapers that win or lose, this was going to be his last wrestling match. It was not. No, can't believe anything Lucian Mark says, anything at all. All right, April 25th, 1883, Kansas City, Missouri, at the Coliseum, attendance 1,500. Clarence Whistler defeated Donald Denny. Now, here's Donald Denny, a very interesting name, a sporting legend in Europe, and here in the United States did quite well. We're going to be talking quite a bit about Donald Denny. If you don't know who Donald Denny is, you're going to learn quite a bit about him as we continue through the book. He truly was one of the all-time great athletes of the 1800s, no doubt. But here, Clarence Whistler beats him 3 out of 5 falls, mixed style match. April the 26th, 1883, Rochester, New York, the Grand Opera House. H.M. Duffer defeated Duncan C. Ross for the National Police Gazette World Championship of Mixed Style Wrestling, 2 out of 3 falls. Richard K. Fox was in attendance and presented a check for $1,000 to Duffer. So, I mean, the actual editor of the Police Gazette's there, so it's got some gravity to the situation here, some weight to it. And so we're going to be considering H.M. Duffer as the world champion of mixed style wrestling here going forward. April 28th, 1883, Springfield, Missouri, City Hall. Clarence Whistler wrestled Tom Cannon to a draw, an exhibition mixed style match. This was on the undercard of a boxing sparring exhibition between Morris O'Connell and Tom Kelly. But now I'm not doing the book, but I would absolutely read a book on Pioneer era prize fighting, bare knuckle fighting, boxing. It's the Pioneer era for that sport in America as well. So a lot of crossover. Also on April 28th, 1883, New Orleans, Louisiana, Washington Artillery Hall, attendance 1,000 people. William Muldoon defeated Professor Theobald Bauer to retain the World Greco-Roman Championship. May the 1st, 1883, Spanish Fort, Louisiana. This I think, is the one that turns into quite a scandal. William Muldoon defeated Professor Theobald Bauer in a handicap match, Greco-Roman style. He threw Bauer 4 times before Bauer declared he could not continue due to injury. This match ended in a big political controversy in Spanish Fort. The mayor was indignant that the match was allowed to take place in violation of city ordinances. A member of the police department was ultimately suspended for allowing the match to go on. Well, it's going to get deeper. It's going to get like Muldoon finds himself in a few of these scandals. We've already talked about he committed, a absolute sin in the 1800s. He wrestled on a Sunday. The match continued on a Sunday, and it really hurt his reputation in the newspapers. Well, he's going to get in a few little dust-ups here on the Gulf as well, down around New Orleans and down in Louisiana. It appears they didn't take to William Muldoon too well down there. May the 3rd, 1883, St. Louis, Missouri. Attendance is large. Clarence Whistler wrestled Tom Cannon to a draw after 2 hours. With 2 falls, each man basically quit the match. Whistler complained that Cannon was wrestling strictly on the defensive, and he'd never be able to throw Cannon under those circumstances. And since Cannon wasn't trying to throw Whistler, then the match was essentially a stalemate. Sounds like a real match. Sounds like a non-hippodrome, a non-work. Could it be? Or was it something to set up was it one to get the gamblers discussing it for a follow-up? I'm not sure. But this certainly sounds like possibly a real match here. A shoot, as they say nowadays. That term didn't come along back then. I never ran across the term shoot or shooting in the Pioneer era. So undoubtedly that came along. I'd like to know, I'm not sure where that word, obviously a shoot takedown in wrestling is a real move and a real thing, but I don't know at what point it transitioned into having a meaning of different from a worked match. If anybody knows, drop it in the comments there on Patreon. I'd love to know. May 12th, 1883, San Francisco, California. So San Francisco is about to become a pretty big hotbed for wrestling. Badgers Park, the first annual Scottish Thistle Club Games. The attendance 1,500 people. Among a variety of different athletic contests was a wrestling match. Donald Denny defeated William R.A. Farrell. Look, William Farrell wrestled under a multitude of names back then. Same guy. I'll try to point him out as we go along, but he wrestled under a few different names. He was also, I think, William Kennedy, John F. Kennedy. I think he had several variations on a William name or a Farrell name. But anyway, Donald Denny beat him in a disputed match under Scottish rules. There was a disagreement about the rules of the match, but Denny won the $50 award. In fact, the newspaper reports that Donald Denny won every contest he participated in, including shot put and the hammer throw. William Muldoon himself was in attendance. And he gets an idea. He sees Donald Denny, superior world athlete, and he's like, here I am, a superior athlete with a championship. I see money's what I see. So we'll see how this works out. Muldoon was in town playing the part of Charles the Wrestler in the play As You Like It. So now he's found himself on the West Coast. He's going to be there for a good long while. May 26, 1883, San Francisco, California, at the Grand Opera House, William Muldoon defeated Donald Denny in a mixed-style Greco-Roman and Scottish rules match lasting 3 hours. The rules were alternating styles, with the winner being whomever obtained the most falls. Muldoon won 16 falls to Denny's 11 falls. Following the match, Muldoon was challenged to a future match by the unknown, who turned out to be Jules Rogel, a Greco-Roman wrestler who had not had a match in years. And look, Jules Rogel was a big name in France. He was a very well-known wrestler. Been around for a long, long time. May 28th, and he's not done with Donald Denny yet either by a long shot. May 28th, 1883, Dodgeville, Wisconsin, the fairgrounds. Jack Carkeek, here's another guy we're going to find a lot about, defeated Evan Lewis. So if you've ever heard Evan Lewis was undefeated in his career, it was not true. Jack Carkeek defeated Evan Lewis in Cornish-style wrestling in 4 out of 7 falls. It was reported in the newspapers that Lewis may have been distracted, as a few days before the match, he had a $225 gold watch and chain stolen from him while he practiced. One of his friends was suspected in the crime. I bet that friend was very happy about being outed to the paper. June 4th, 1883, San Francisco, California, Union Hall. Attendance large. William Muldoon defeated Jules Rogel in Greco-Roman wrestling. 2 straight falls. The match lasted 2 hours. And here, we talk about Tom Connors and Tom Cannon. If you have the book, there's a picture of Tom Cannon, famous wrestler. And I know that because he's standing with 2 other dudes in front of a giant wooden sign that says Tom Connors, famous wrestler. It was sort of we all see and remember the meme, poor rest in peace, Virgil. Used to put up the tables, Virgil, superstar wrestler, just spring these up in New York, possibly at a Subway or something. I guess that's what Tom Connors was doing. It's what it looks like. But anyway, Tom Connors, famous wrestler. You want to know what he looks like? Well, like every other 1800s wrestler. He's slight, he's wearing black trunks, he's got a wacky mustache, and he was probably a very, very strong human being. All right, June the 6th, 1883 in St. Louis, Missouri. And I talked about this earlier, so here we go. We'll wrap up today's show about the poisoning, the suspected poisoning of Tom Connors. June 6th, 1883. In St. Louis, Missouri, before the big wrestling tournament, Tom Connors is allegedly poisoned, and it is suspected, according to the newspapers, that Edwin Bibby was behind it. Did Edwin Bibby try to murder one of his opponents? Well, let's just walk this through, see what happened. Tom Connors, it was reported, was given a glass of ginger ale and became violently ill. A doctor was called and determined that Connors had been poisoned with arsenic. You can kind of see him in his top hat back in the day, looking around the room, twiddling his, fancy mustache, and then pointing straight to the sky and proclaiming, "It's a poisoning by arsenic." Well, it might not have been. Bibby denied the charges, and another doctor said that Connors was actually sick with malaria. That's not really something you want to be getting wrong. Anyway, Tom Connors recovers enough. He participates in this tournament, but whether he was poisoned or not, I guess is any man's guess. June the 7th, 1883, Rochester, New York, Duncan C. Ross defeated H.M. Duffer in a mixed-style match. 2 out of 3 falls. The two had been advertised for weeks as supposedly appearing in this same St. Louis tournament. Many of the people advertised were not there. So let's get to this big tournament. June 8th, 1883, St. Louis, Missouri, Sportsman Park. The first night of a 3-night grand wrestling tournament, which had been promoted for a couple of months in newspapers across the country. Now, apparently, we've had one of the participants possibly poisoned. A few of the big names not there. So let's see what happens. Clarence Whistler beat Edwin Bibby in Greco-Roman. Tom Cannon, not Connors, not the one poisoned, but Tom Cannon defeated Charles Bixermos. Andre Cristal wrestled Fred Zetrich to a 1-hour draw with no fall, and the poison, perhaps Tom Connor, did not wrestle on this show. The next night, June 9th, 1883, St. Louis, Missouri, second day of the St. Louis Wrestling Tournament was postponed due to rain. Tom Connor is said to be recovering well from his sickness or poisoning or whatever actually happened to him. June the 10th, 1883, St. Louis, Missouri, Sportsman Park, attendance 1,000 people. The St. Louis tournament continues. Andre Cristal defeated Fred Zachrich in Greco-Roman. Charles Bixermos defeated Edwin Bibby in Greco-Roman. Clarence Whistler defeated Tom Cannon in Catch-as-Catch-Can. Andre Cristal defeated Charles Bixermos in Greco-Roman. And Tom Connor wrestled and went to a draw, with Andre Cristal. Greco-Roman rules. No falls taken in the match. June 11th, 1883, St. Louis, Missouri, Sportsman's Park, the final day of the St. Louis tournament. Clarence Whistler defeated Andre Cristal, with Cristal suffering a dislocated shoulder. Imagine that. Imagine Clarence, Whistler, Andre Cristal. Remember the whole Andre Cristal, fake Andre Cristal deal with Colonel James H. McLaughlin was over a broken collarbone, injured shoulder. Turned out that was Lucian Mark actually pretending to be Andre Cristal. More shoulder injuries here. Edwin Bibby defeated Tom Cannon in Catch-as-Catch-Can. Clarence Whistler won first place in Greco-Roman and second in Catch-as-Catch-Can. Edwin Bibby, perhaps our suspect in the poisoning, won first prize in Catch-as-Catch-Can. Originally, this tournament was promoted as featuring virtually every major name of the era, including William Muldoon, Duncan C. Ross, and H.M. Duffer. However, Muldoon was with his showbiz troupe in California, and the National Police Gazette set up a competing tournament in Boston after all the major newspapers started running ads for the St. Louis tournament. So what happens in the Boston tournament? The National Police Gazette tournament. Boston, Massachusetts, the casino. National Police Gazette World Championship Tournament for the championship badge of the world. Yes, a badge. We've seen medals, we've seen belts, now we've got a badge to denote the champion wrestler of the world. The wrestlers face each other in a variety of mixed styles, one-fall matches. Yes, one-fall matches. Catch-as-Catch-Can, collar and elbow, and Greco-Roman are all wrestled. At the end of night one, the official ratings from the Boston Globe were as follows. Duncan C. Ross in first place, followed by G.W. Flagg, H.M. Duffer, Patrick O'Donnell, E. Burton, and W.A. Burbank. Now, I have here a DragonKingKarl note to try to hash all this out in some form. For months in advance of the St. Louis tournament, It had promoted itself as the biggest tournament in pro wrestling since the 1870 Detroit International Tournament and promised all the major names of the day, including William Muldoon, Duncan C. Ross, and H.M. Duffer. A few weeks later, ads started appearing for a grand wrestling tournament in Boston, backed by Richard K. Fox in the National Police Gazette. One can only guess that Fox saw the publicity the St. Louis tournament was getting and decided to throw a party of his own, and in doing so got Duncan C. Ross, H.M. Duffer, and G.W. Flagg. He probably would have got William Muldoon, too, had he not been on the other side of the country. William Muldoon wasn't in either tournament. Instead, he appeared in the play he was part of in California and wrestling a few of the West Coast wrestlers as well. Tournaments were a popular promotional tool dating back well into the early pioneer era of wrestling in the United States. The 1870 Detroit International Tournament was a giant success and, generally speaking, set the rules in the field of pro wrestling for most of the rest of the 1800s. In 1883, in St. Louis, Missouri, decided to host a grand wrestling tournament featuring all the biggest names of the day. Whoever was backing Clarence Whistler following his split from William Muldoon's combination was probably behind the financing of the tournament. For months in advance of the tournament, they promised in newspapers across the United States what would have been the greatest tournament lineup in history up to this point. The newspapers proudly proclaimed that in addition to Clarence Whistler, who was getting lots of press at this point, also appearing to be William Muldoon himself, who is currently in California, the American Collar and Elbow Champion, H.M. Duffer, Andre Cristal, Edwin Bibby, G.W. Flagg, the World Mixed Styles Champion, Police Gazette Champion, Duncan C. Ross, and a newcomer here in the United States, Englishman Tom Connors. I suppose it's possible that many of the aforementioned people may have verbally expressed interest in participating, but by this time the sport and men's publication, National Police Gazette, and its owner, Richard K. Fox, essentially controlled wrestling on the East Coast. Fox worked with longtime promoter and wrestling carny Harry Hill and extensively with William Muldoon and others. So when the St. Louis tournament started getting big publicity nationally, Richard K. Fox developed his own tournament to immediately follow in Boston, Massachusetts, and another soon afterward in Buffalo, New York. Fox backed Duncan C. Ross, G.W. Flagg, and H.M. Duffer, so they did not show in the St. Louis tournament. William Muldoon also did not appear. That still left Clarence Whistler with a respectable crew. Whistler had worked extensively with Andre Cristal when the two of them toured with William Muldoon. Tom Connors was the new English hot act in America, and Edwin Bibby was very well known and rising in his career as well. What happened next is fascinating. I'm almost certain this was a work for the newspapers, but it was 141 years ago, so who knows. June 6, 1883, St. Louis, Missouri. Before the big wrestling tournament, Tom Connors allegedly poisoned and is suspected, according to the newspapers, that Edwin Bibby was behind it. We talked about the ginger ale story, doctors calling, it might have been malaria, who knows. The story appeared 2 days before the tournament began and was published in the St. Louis newspapers. Bibby stated to the newspapers that he already had a room in the city, and in order to help Tom Connors out, told him that he could room with him. Bibby said that Connors went to bed that night feeling ill and woke up later in the night violently ill, and that is when the first doctor was called, who suspected the arsenic poisoning. The source of the poisoning, the ginger ale, was introduced into the story by Connors, who said he drank some ginger ale before going to bed. Somehow, without police involvement, which leads me to believe the story was probably planted by Clarence Whistler to draw interest in the tournament, ultimately cleared Bibby by taking Connors to a second doctor who suspected he had malaria or another similar sickness. Whatever was the case, within 2 days, Tom Connors is well enough to compete in the St. Louis Grand Wrestling Tournament of 1883. It is a little confusing that there are two people from England with similar names here, Tom Connors and Tom Cannon. It is Connors who was allegedly poisoned. All right, so let's probably pause here, and we'll pick back up on our next show, Hour 83, with the sponsor of Terry K. We'll pick up there in June of 1883, and we've got another tournament coming up in the middle of the country. We've got tournaments everywhere, as everyone's trying to hash out who the best of the best at this point in time is. And wrestling's really, I mean, it is nationwide at this point. As you can see, there's wrestling on any given day happening on the West Coast, Mid-America, the Gulf Coast, the East Coast, all over the United States. And again, that's what this book focuses on, is the history, the origin, and evolution of pro wrestling in the United States of America. And so I hope you, if you don't already have it, check out my book, DragonKingKarl's Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus, the Bible of the Pioneer Era of Wrestling. And I hope many people build upon the research found therein. I hope my work over many years of going through thousands of old 1800s newspapers, I've at least collected the information in one place for anyone who wants to build off of it, maybe take something they found interesting in the book, be it a person, a match, a time period, whatever, and build upon that. I would love to see that. And we're going to continue here on 1,000 Hours for as long as we have sponsorship to do so, discussing this very underrepresented area. Now, for our Patreon supporters, hang on. We're going to stick with you just a little bit longer. For everybody else, thank you for joining me, and check us out. Check out the book as well at whenitwascool.com. Patreons, I'll see you on the other side here. Hey everybody, this is Carl Stern from whenitwascool.com. I'm here to tell you about my new book, now available, DragonKingKarl's Pioneer Era Pro Wrestling Omnibus, the Bible of the Pioneer Era of professional wrestling. Pro wrestling didn't start with Frank Gotch. He didn't just appear out of the void to bring us entertainment-style professional wrestling. No, it was built on a legacy some 70 to 80 years old. That's what I'm going to talk to you about, an era of wrestling in America seldom ever discussed, never before in this detail. I have put 700 pages of information about the pioneers of professional wrestling, like William Muldoon, Colonel James H. McLaughlin, Professor Theobald Bauer, Clarence Whistler, William Miller, and so many more. Maybe some names you've never heard of before, maybe some you've only heard in passing. I will tell you the origins and evolution. Now available, Amazon.com, whenitwascool.com.